Hi there, I'm Anne-Marie Collins. I'm a flute teacher with Bold Music. So this book I'm working out of today is The Flute Player's Companion. These are the types of books that I offer to my students, and for online lessons specifically, I'll scan them and put them in Google Drive or whatever's easiest for the student to pull it up during our lesson. It starts out with a quote from Quantz that says, "Anything the fingers can't immediately manage must be repeated often." So that's a very good thing to remember when it comes to practicing in general, is repetition, and that practice makes permanent. Learning how to practice in a very smart way is, I think, very effective and something to remember daily as you dig into whatever you're working on. So anyway, this piece that I have been working on very recently, just in the past couple weeks I picked it up, is The Swing by Kohler, I think is how you say that name. It's a German composer. He was, Louis Kohler is the full name. He was born 1820, died 1886. Works included operas, ballets, and a lot of educational works for piano. So this one's called The Swing, as I mentioned. I kind of want to go ahead and dig into it. I've noticed quite a few challenges coming out of this one. Hopefully you can kind of hear how they come into play. This piece is in a moderato tempo, which is usually from 108 to 120, in that range. So hopefully you caught some things that maybe if you were the flute player yourself right now, you would like to work on, to improve on, and kind of segment out and make sure that you're working on those specifically and isolating them versus playing the whole thing through multiple times and then not really fixing those problems that are in there. Something that you may have noticed is that the tempo, I was kind of pushing and pulling and changing the phrasing a little bit. It wouldn't be metronomical. It wouldn't be da 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 da. That's what I mean by metronomical. Is it if you're playing with a metronome, you're exactly with that downbeat. I don't think this was written for that purpose, and that's where the interpretation comes into play. I'm pushing and pulling those rhythms because I'm imagining myself actually as a piano player, which comes into thinking about the composer and the historical context of the piece. If a piano player were to play this, and you may have seen, hopefully you've seen a pianist perform before where they kind of lean into the notes and lean into the piano. It might be da 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 da. You don't have to stay right with the metronome if it helps being expressive in the piece. So that's where you'll hear a lot of my pulling back on the tempo at the beginning of the measure and then kind of falling into those 16th notes. And hopefully, the goal is to stay somewhat on the beat. To, if you're pulling back, there's an equal and opposite, pushing forward to get to that downbeat somewhat close to where that metronome would have been. And there's kind of an art that goes to that, just for that pause and creating that musical phrase a little bit more fully. So let me play that for you, like once again. And I even kind of pulled back there. I think I did it a little bit more now just for emphasis than I did the first time around. But when you're kind of ending the phrase, you can kind of pull back as well and kind of think of it as a sentence. I'm landing on that period at the very end versus a comma. So hopefully that kind of helped you hear that entire phrase as a whole. And I think as a musician, I kind of naturally will kind of bring those things out without even thinking about it. I picked this up without doing any research on it or hearing it before. And I kind of just naturally started to put those pushes and pulls in there because it sounded right to me. So that, again, once again, interpretation of the piece. Someone might play it completely differently, and that's okay. I just think musically it makes sense. Some other things that you'll find in this piece that we haven't talked about yet. We've gone over tempo and phrasing. Along with phrasing, breath marks are very, very important. And if you noticed when I showed you the piece, I have my breath marks actually written in. And I think one of my biggest mistakes on that the whole way through that I just played for you guys is that I didn't exactly follow those breath marks. I put them there for a reason, and they are strategically placed, and I know where they should be. But sometimes, whether it be because I didn't take a big enough breath or the right kind of breath on the last one, I couldn't quite make it, or maybe I took a breath too soon and I wound up having enough air to go through a breath mark, and it wound up leaving me too short on the next phrase. So following your plan that you have in the page, I'm going to just kind of turn this for you guys, is very important. So if I were to do this again for you guys right now, I would definitely more closely follow what I had planned in here, all of my breath marks that I have written down. And then along with the phrasing, which we've discussed a little bit so far, I've also kind of put in my notes, there's a line over that first note that I really want to emphasize in the phrasing. So da 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 da, like that, all kind of right, almost like a legato marking above the note. So some other things here, I think I followed all the rhythms very closely, so I don't have any real changes to do with that. If someone else, like a student, were to work on this and I noticed some rhythms not being quite accurate, regardless of the phrasing and the push and the pull with the tempo, you still have to have your rhythms very sound and exactly as they're written. So for example, you'll see some dotted eighths and 16ths. So in those you'll also notice the phrase ending in between there. So just making sure that you're true to that rhythm with all of the phrasing and dynamic markings and everything else built in that you have to think about all at the same time is really important. This is very well placed in the facility part of the book because obviously it's very technically involved with fingers. Hopefully you were able to kind of see my fingers moving quite a bit to get through this piece. The challenge that I've noticed with that is, especially with some of these note combinations, you'll notice fingers don't go down at the exact same time that they're supposed to, and you'll hear these little blips in the sound. That actually took quite a bit of work for me to get to this point where I am now, because when you have less fingers to move in between 16th notes, they tend to go up and down faster. So in that note grouping, first we have A to G sharp to A. Now that versus F to E to F, you might notice, because there's two fingers moving here, it might be a little bit slower than maybe the F to E. Plus, some of us have more dominant fingers than others. The weaker fingers are going to move a little bit more slowly than those more dominant fingers. And I think that's just because I'm right-handed, maybe the F to the E tend to move a little bit quicker. So I have to slow those down just a little bit to make sure that all of the note values are the exact same within reason and in the context of the phrasing. So instead of, that's what we're trying to avoid. We want to do da 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 da, because at that point we're really being true to the note value, and it should be da 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 da, more metronomic in that part of the measure. So I've noticed a few places in this piece where those types of challenges come in, and you have to really isolate those and even circle them. You can erase it later if you want to. Make sure you're using a pencil. But it really helps to isolate those and really work your fingers through it. There's also some bigger leaps, like the next measure. You're working with thirds there, so there's a bigger gap between the notes. So that might kind of slow you down a little bit. It might get kind of clunky, and it helps to really repeat that quite a bit, and even play it with a metronome, just that one part, and making sure that it's da 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 da, and you're not slowing down one part or the other or the whole 16th note grouping. And the last part of challenges that I've kind of picked apart so far in this piece is pitch and intonation. So that definitely comes into play at the very end of this with the fermata at the end. I'll play that last line for you. So that, if you don't practice it correctly, can kind of be different every single time, and that's the frustrating and challenging part of being a flute player. Is so much repetition goes into making sure that it's played the exact same every single time. I think every time that I've played that fermata at the end, it's been a little bit different, and I haven't quite put in the amount of time that would be needed to make sure it's consistent every time I play it. But what you heard there is a run of 16th notes, and then at the very end it says diminuendo and rallentando. So that means you're slowing down and you're getting a little bit quieter. So that's kind of up for interpretation as well, as much as you want to slow down and as much as you want to get quieter towards that last note, and as much as you physically can as well. Some more experienced flute players might be able to get that C right in tune and also get it very soft and very with a great tone, and then you can just kind of taper off at the end, and that's kind of the sweet part of hearing just an expert flute player be able to do that. So that's what we're striving for here, is trying to be like them. I added in quite a bit of vibrato that kind of helped me with the tapering of the phrase at the end and making sure that the sound didn't drop out. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in tapering, especially when you're really quiet and getting towards that upper register. A C is a pretty tricky note, so if I'm holding that out, so you'll hear that drop at the end. I didn't continue supporting the sound, and I didn't have that vibrato to kind of keep the momentum going with the airstream. So the pressure kind of suffered, and then the note just kind of dropped out, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And supporting the sound, giving it a little vibrato to really focus that airstream, and then hold it out as long as you can, and just trying to die off as consistently as possible rather than an abrupt ending. So that's The Swing by Kohler, just a fun one that I've been working on. So hopefully this gave you kind of a brief overview of what lessons with me might be like, and all the different things that I like to work on with my students. And hopefully I hear from you soon if you have any interest in flute lessons, and thank you for listening.